Good day. We are the second group, and one of the laws we will be discussing is the Climate Change Act of 2009, or the Republic Act 9729. This law was created in response to the growing threats of climate change in the Philippines, a country often ranked among the most vulnerable to disasters like typhoons, flooding, and sea level rise. Through this act, the government sought to mainstream climate change into national and local policies and established the Climate Change Commission to coordinate efforts in protecting both our environment and our communities. Republic Act No. 9729, also known as the Climate Change Act of 2009. This law was enacted to mainstream climate change into government policy formulation and to establish the Climate Change Commission, or CCC, the main body responsible for coordinating, monitoring, and evaluating climate change programs across the country. The rationale behind this law is rooted in the Philippines' high vulnerability to climate change impacts, such as rising sea levels, stronger typhoons, and biodiversity loss. It seeks to protect the people's right to a healthful ecology while aligning the country with the international frameworks like the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Yoga Framework for Action, which emphasize the stabilization of greenhouse gases and building resilience to climate-related disasters. In terms of scope, RA 9729 applies to all national, sectoral, and local government policies, plans, and programs. It requires the creation of both national and local climate change action plans, with LGUs serving as frontline implementers. The CCC works with agencies like the ENR, DepEd, DFA, and the ALG to integrate climate change into education, infrastructure, disaster risk reduction, and even gender-sensitive planning. However, this law also has its limitation. The CCC mainly serves as a policy-making and coordinating body, but it lacks enforcement powers, meaning execution still depends on LGUs and other agencies. Implementation is often constrained by budget availability, political will, and the capacity of local governments. Finally, because it requires coordination across many sectors, its effectiveness depends heavily on multi-stakeholder cooperation, which is not always easy to achieve.
In the relevant discussion, I will share some issues in the Philippines that are connected to the Climate Change Act of 2009, especially in the relation to urban planning. First, some local governments have started to include climate actions in their land use plans. They have used hazard maps and set coastal setbacks so that new buildings and communities are not placed in dangerous area. This is a good example of how the law is applied. Second, flooding in the cities have become worse. One reason is that drainage systems are not enough, and land use planning does not fully consider the stronger drains we now experience. Because of this, many areas suffer from heavy floods that damage homes, roads, and daily activities. Third, coastal reclamation and unregulated seaside projects also at risk. Instead of reducing the risks, they increase the exposure to sea level rise and storm surge. This puts many coastal communities in danger. Next is many local governments still lack resources. They do not have enough staff, equipment, or budget to create and carry out effective climate action plans. This is why some areas can respond well and while others are left behind. Lastly, many of our roads, housing, and public facilities are still building using old standards. These do not match the stronger typhoons and heavier rains we face today, making them weak and costly to repair in the future. In summary, while there are good effects happening in some areas, many gaps remain in planning, funding, and implementation. To make our cities more climate resilient, we need a stronger integration of climate risk assessment into planning, stronger infrastructure standards, and more supports for LGU that lacks the resources to act.
Republic Act 9729, or the Climate Change Act of 2009, sets up a clear framework for incorporating climate change into government plans nationwide. It assigns specific roles to agencies, promotes coordination, and mainstreams climate policies into development strategies. The law relies heavily on local governments to implement these policies through land use plans, zoning, and permits. However, when local governments lack resources or enforcement power, the law's goals become harder to achieve. To address this, the climate risk assessment should be mandatory in all local plans and permitting processes to ensure projects are resilient to climate impacts. Local governments, especially those with fewer resources, must be given dedicated funding and technical support to create effective action plans. Finally, updating building codes and infrastructure standards to include climate-proof measures like flood controls and sea level rise protections is crucial for sustainable and resilient urban development.
Let us now move to the Republic Act 10121 or the Philippine Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Act of 2010. This law is actually interrelated sa RA 9279 or Climate Change Act of 2009. It basically complements this law by strengthening yung disaster preparedness, prevention, and response. So together, these two laws work hand in hand para makabuild tayo ng mas safe and more resilient communities. So RA number 10121 was created to shift our focus from being reactive to being proactive when it comes sa pag-deal natin with disasters. So instead na nagre-respond lang tayo kapag nandiyan na yung calamity, the law emphasizes preparation, prevention, and resilience. So it mandates then na isama ang disaster risk reduction at climate change concerns sa national at local development plans para ma-identify at ma-address na agad yung mga possible problems sa future. And the law decentralizes disaster management by empowering local government units and communities to manage their own disaster risk funds and planning. And in this way, mas lumalakas ang local capacities at mas nagiging effective and community-driven yung disaster response natin. The law created the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council as the lead coordinating body requiring every province, municipality, and barangay to form their own DRRM council to ensure preparedness and response at all levels. So in disaster management, hindi lang siya limited to the government. The law ensures na yung mga policies and procedures are standardized and inclusive, not limiting sa involvement ng public agencies but also private businesses, NGOs, and communities for stronger coordination. So under this law, ina-obligate ang mga LGU to set aside at least 5% of their annual budget specifically for disaster response programs, ensuring na yung mga resources are always available for emergencies. So, the law mandates as well the proactive measures like installing warning systems, identifying hazard-prone areas, training responders, and engaging communities. So, risks are reduced and response is faster and more effective. And lastly, kasama rin ang disaster preparedness sa school curriculum and public information campaigns para magkaroon ng awareness, knowledge, and as well as the practical skills yung mga students and citizens kung paano dapat kumilos kapag may disaster.
The Republic Act 10121 requires all local government to integrate disaster risk reduction and climate change adoption into their comprehensive land use plans or CLOPs. This is meant to make sure that the land use decisions are guided by hazard, risk, and climate protection. The problem is, CLOPs usually cover a 10-year period and a lot can change within that time. In fact, according to PIDS press release in July 2023, 55% or half of the clubs are already outdated, and 4% of municipalities and cities doesn't even have clubs at all. With rapid urbanization, new infrastructure, and shifting settlement pattern, many of the assumptions in the plan quickly become updated. On the top of that, climate conditions are changing faster with heavier rains and more frequent flooding. So if the clubs weren't updated regularly, this This leaves big gaps in flood control, disaster preparedness, and community safety. So the real issue is, while RA 10121 created the local DRR funds or the 5% of annual LGU budget, these funds are not always maximized for long-term solution that this law always target. Some LGUs underutilize this, while others face allegation of misuse and misallocation. These governance and corruption issues undetermine the intent of RA 10121. Instead of proactive, risk-informed flood management, many LGUs end up with fragment projects that fail to reduce vulnerability. That is the issue today.
The synthesis of RN 10121 confirms the law's success in transitioning disaster management from relief to proactive risk reduction by decentralizing responsibilities to local government units, mandating they dedicated 70% of their funds to prevention, and by formalizing the internationally recognized 4 pillars of the RMM framework, which are prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery. Yet the implementation of RA 10121 has faced challenges, especially every devastating disaster. Hence, to overcome RA 10121 implementation failures during major disasters, immediate action is required to establish a unified disaster authority with strictly defined agency rules, enforce strict land use to prohibit construction in high-risk zones, and provide systematic support for frontliners and comprehensive psychological recovery for victims.